Hey guys, Ben Crawshaw here. Thank you so much for jumping in with us today. We're going to get right into it and talk about how you can help guests feel at home. Had a lot of conversations with you. A lot of you have been asking about this, outsiders, visitors, guests, whatever word that you use. But I also want to point you to another video that is part of Launchpad this month, and it's an interview that I do with Josh Harrison, a guest services director at a church. One of the interesting things he says in that video is stop thinking of guests as just first-time guests. In reality, anyone who comes to your church at any time is a guest, and treating them that way. And I think that's important for us to remember, that people have been showing up for a long time, still thinking of them as our guest, and we're going to do everything we can to be hospitable to them. And people who are kind of dabbling in and out at our church, they are still our guests. Every guest is unique in the way we approach them. I would really encourage you to watch that interview and some of the stuff he had to say as I asked him the way he thinks through guest services. Some really interesting stuff he had to say about really thinking about it, not just in terms of people coming to his church, but thinking about it in terms of when he goes and visits any other place, restaurants, schools. What does he wish he knew? What is not being communicated to him? What makes him feel at home? And that's part of his process that he thinks through when he goes back and incorporates it into his church. So that was a great interview as far as his content that he gave us. Now, when I started in church world, one of the things that my boss wanted me to do was home visitations. And I didn't really know what that meant, but it meant what it says. Just go visit people in their homes. Now, I was poor, didn't have any money, a very low-paying job, so I just scheduled it around dinner time and basically was calling people in the church saying, hey, can I come over to your house for dinner? Because I figured, hey, that's free food for me. And it was just interesting. Every time I pulled out of someone's driveway after I had gone over to their house for dinner, just the differences. With some people, I felt like a guest. And with some people, I felt like I was an intruder. I remember one time I was eating dinner at somebody's house, and the food was like kind of spicy, and we were drinking Diet Dr. Pepper. I'm a big Diet Dr. Pepper fan, by the way. And so I asked for a second one, and he said, geez, you're going to drink us out of house and home. I thought, wow, I feel like an intruder right now. But I'm still going to get a second Diet Dr. Pepper, okay? So I'm just thirsty. But times when I felt like an outsider, or times when I felt like an insider. I mean, there were literally times when I left people I barely knew and felt like I was just a part of their family already. And it's just such a different emotional response. And that's one of the things we're going to hone in on this module is emotions, because that's so much kind of the crux of it for people who are visiting our church. And we're going to think a little bit for a minute specifically on first-time guests, people who have never been to your church before. But you really want to move them from feeling like an intruder to feeling like a guest. You want to move them from feeling like an outsider to feeling like an insider. And one of the things that you have to do to understand what they feel is that you have to get into their head, into their emotions, into their heart. And truthfully, church for you, it represents hope on your side, and it represents fear on their side. You're excited about and you're charged up around the idea of them coming to your church because you want to offer hope to their lives. Well, all they're feeling is fear. So you have to understand that the approach to church itself is very different emotionally from your standpoint and from their standpoint. And I'm not saying become less hopeful and more fearful. I'm just saying don't just think in terms of hope. Think in terms of relating to their fear, and that's going to help you help first-time guests feel at home. And so specifically today, we're going to talk about 5 questions to ask yourself to help your guests feel at home. Okay, so we're going to jump right in. You can take notes along with this. Do whatever you can to hold on to these things and take them back to your team. And the first thing, it comes down to planning. And the question is, what's their story? What is their story? One of the great things that I think you could do practically is create a model person or family that may be visiting your church for the first time. Create an avatar for them. What's their name? We did this at the previous job that I worked. We literally created the name for someone. We created their situation and their story. What's the age? Is this a family with young kids? That's important if you created that as your typical first-time guest, because one of the things we'll talk about in a second is really kids, and the way you handle people and their children and their babies as they walk into a church is one of the number one things you can do to help guests feel at home. Is this a single person? Is this someone who's coming from another church, who's somebody who's not going to church? And one of the best ways to do that is to think back over the last couple months or couple years. Who are the first-time guests that have shown up at your church? What was their story? You want to create kind of a common profile and you literally want to spell out their story. What is going to be bringing them to your church this week? What are they looking for? What are they afraid of? Create their story. What's their scenario coming in? That's a great first question to ask yourself. The second question has to do with pain, and it's really, what's the solution? So everybody's coming in with different pain points and different levels of severity, but you want to be thinking through solutions. So as you think about their story, there's pain that comes out of their story. You want to be thinking in terms of solutions. Now let me get very practical here if you feel like I'm being theoretical, and talk about this. A potential pain that they may have is they're dropping off their baby with a stranger. We'll get to this at the end, but some of the common conversations that I've had with people, my wife, her friends from high school that we've tried to invite to church, they'll say, I've never dropped my baby off with a stranger. I've never dropped my baby off with anybody other than my mom or my nanny, who I know very, very well. And you're just thinking, hey, our church is great. And they're thinking, no, I'm going to have to drop off my 6-month-old with someone I've never seen before and they've never seen before. That is a huge pain point. So you want to already be thinking about the solution. And the solution basically has to do with what you communicate to that mom immediately. Number one, this is the safest place a baby can be in this entire city or county or state. That we are so organized that if your baby has an allergy, we're not going to give them goldfish if they're allergic to goldfish. We're super organized in what we do. And then warmth. It's just this warmth, the way you look at them and smile at them and look at their baby and hold their baby and talk to their baby. You're communicating something that is a potential solution to their pain. My wife was a preschool director at a church, and I always, no matter how bad babies were, when parents came to pick them up, I would say, he did great or she did great. Is that lying? Probably. But I just really wanted to communicate, this is a warm place. This is a great place for your baby to be, because I knew if they could continue to drop off that baby, there was an opportunity for them to relax in that worship service and be open to an opportunity to encounter Jesus Christ. But before you get to them encountering Jesus Christ, you're addressing the pain that they're feeling. Here's another one. They're tired. Well, that's not a pain point. Yes, it is. People just come in and they're tired, especially if they're not used to going to church. They're used to sleeping in, reading the paper, watching football on Sunday. Now they got up and they're dressed up and they're walking into a church. So what if you just had greeters offer them coffee? What if it was just like, hey, you give them permission to drink as much coffee as they want? It's a quick solution, but it addresses pain that they're feeling. So when you get into people's story, what's going on in their lives, what are they thinking, what are they feeling, you want to meet them with solutions. That's a great next step for you when it comes to helping guests feel at home. Then what is the system? You want to think through a system for first-time guests. Now, and again, you watch that interview with Josh Harrison. You cannot systematize human beings because every human being is different. And so you and your volunteers, as you work with first-time guests, you need to know that everybody's different. Everybody's going to have different needs and requests and changes. So you want to be flexible, but you also want to be prepared. You want to think through the whole process for them from parking lot to parking lot. And let me walk you through that here. If you go to the top of this graph, you'll see number one. I'm going to go fast, and then I'm going to come back and go slow, okay? The process for a guest: driving in, walking in, dropping off, sitting down, picking up, walking out, driving off, all right? That was fast, but this is the step for a first-time guest, especially if they have young kids. They drive in your parking lot. They walk in your lobby. They drop off their kids. They sit down in your main service. They pick up their kids. They walk out of your lobby, and then they drive off out of your parking lot. So you want something at every one of those 7 steps that represents a system. This is just simply a philosophy for this thing. Let me give you an example. Number one, driving in, you may say, smile. This is step 1 in our process, is the smiling step, okay? That people come in, and by the way, when you communicate to your parking team, you feel like this is an unglamorous, unimportant job. It's really hot some days. It's cold and rainy some days. You are creating the first impression for people as they come into church. There's no job more important to that. Parking doesn't seem important. Have you ever tried to go to the mall at Christmas time? Yeah, it's frustrating if you don't know where to go and you don't know where to park. Now, you may have a small church, a small parking lot. Still, at some point outside, you're going to create a system for outside. We smile at people. Maybe your parking lot's kind of confusing, so the system for number one, driving in, is to clear up the confusion. So you would just write that down. Number one, what is the goal of a parking team? To clear up the confusion. And then walking in, the goal would be signage, clear signs, because they're already thinking about number 3, which is dropping off their babies when they walk in, but they don't know where to go. So walking in, you want to have clear signage, or maybe it's create a conversation. Maybe that's you say, we're going to smile at them, then we want to create a conversation when they're in the lobby, or we want to clear up the confusion as they drive in, we want clear signage as they're walking in. It's just whatever system works for your church, but have a system. Have a system in place for all 7 of those. The next question is, what's their speech? You could also say, what's their slang? This has to do with your presentation. And this is really about how you communicate to them, a little bit in the lobby, but mainly from stage, is what are you saying to them? And you have to understand they don't know you, so you want to introduce yourself. I work at this church, so I'm on full-time staff, or I'm a volunteer here, which means I have a full-time job throughout the week, but I help out the church. They don't know who you know. Yeah, just go talk to Jim over there at the information table. Who's Jim? Where's the information table? Yeah, our student pastor, his name is Chris. What's a student pastor, and who's Chris? So you have to explain that to them. Hey, let me walk you over here. This is our information table. Nancy's working there. Information just means you have any questions, she's going to be there. She's a good friend of mine who loves to talk to people who just want to know more about the church. You see the difference in just communication. They don't know the names of your environments. If you say, hey, we have this weekend retreat coming up for our students in Extreme, they're going to love it. Well, you know that Extreme is your middle school environment. They don't know that. Yeah, just drop them off at Upstart, or whatever you call your children's environment. No, they need to understand. You need to be very clear. Hey, our middle school environment, 6th to 8th grade, they're going to a Christian retreat center this weekend for just to focus on relationships and some stuff from the Bible. You want to speak in clear language, which brings to the last point. They don't know Christian terms. Have you worshiped with us before? What does that mean? Are you a member somewhere else? Like a member? Are you talking about a golf club, like a Jelly of the Month club, something like that? You need to speak in terms that are very clear to people who just aren't involved with church every week, or not involved with your church, and that'll help people feel like, man, I clearly understand what's happening. And finally, what's their step? How can we propel them? And you don't want to be too pushy with first-time guests, but you also want to connect them. You want to help them at least understand there's potential connecting points for them to your church. The faster you can get somebody to feel like this is my church and not just a church that I'm going to, the greater the chance for them to stick. And so, think about something like an information table, or think about something like follow-up emails, where you want to go through potentially a process like this, an introduction. Again, whether you're working an information table, whether you send a follow-up email, this is who I am, this is a picture of me, I work at the church. And then inspiration. Just so then you go, hey, this is why we think our student ministry is such a great place for your teenager, is because blah, 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 because they're small group leaders, they invest, because here's why we love small groups, is because small groups give you a chance to not just hear it, but to talk about it. This gives you a chance to connect and make new friends in this community. So before you get to information that pertains to them, you want to talk about the why. You want to be inspiring, whether this is through a face-to-face interaction at an information table or a follow-up email. Then you get to information. So again, let's say they have a teenager and you say, we think student ministry is great because there's these small group leaders and they think they're cool and they speak into their life, and they're not a whole lot older than them, but they have wisdom and perspective. Then you get to information. Student ministry meets every Sunday night at 6 o'clock in the back of our church. Then you get to information. Or small groups. You say, if you would like to be in a small group, in 1 week, we're going to make a big announcement. You fill out that form. We'll follow up with you after that. And then you make some type of invitation. Hey, I would love for you to bring your teenage son to student ministry this week. Hey, I would love for you to maybe consider filling out this card that just says you're interested in small groups. Anything, whether it's, hey, we need volunteers, we would love for you to come back next week for this series, whatever you're inviting to them to, give them a next step so that they can already feel like there's something that you would love for them to be a part of, because you value their visit to your church. Also, I love follow-up handwritten thank you notes. Thank you for just stopping by, giving our church a chance. I know it's not an easy thing to just get up and go to a strange place. We really appreciate it. Something along those lines. And as we close this module, I want to show you 3 quotes that I've literally gotten from people about church, particularly about my church, the church that I go to. Somebody said to me, I'll get struck by lightning if I walk through the doors of a church. That was an extended family member of mine. And what to notice is that's an emotion. That's an emotion of guilt, and it's an emotion of fear and really kind of shame. Only married couples with kids go to church there. This was a server that my wife and I had at a restaurant, a waiter, and this is what he said. And notice the emotion there. I don't belong. There's not people like me there. Last one, I've never dropped off my baby with anyone other than my mom. There was a girl, when my wife and I had our second baby, she was a nurse in the pediatric area where we went. And I think she knew my wife from the past somewhere, and said, I've never dropped my baby off with anyone other than my mom. And so it was this sense of anxiety. What could happen? How will my baby react? So all of these emotions, and it really comes down to this, is people want to know, am I okay? Am I going to be okay there emotionally? Emotionally. They're not thinking necessarily through spiritually and worship and the Bible. They're thinking emotionally, am I going to be okay? And imagine if they could say something like this: I felt welcome when I walked through the doors of that church. Or I felt acceptance from people of all ages at the church. Imagine if they could walk out of your church and say, I felt safe dropping off my baby at the church nursery. Even if they don't continue to come to your church, the reputation at your church will grow. I've seen people invite people to churches that they don't even go to because they know, hey, you'll be accepted there. I don't go there, but I know that you have a baby, your baby would love it in that nursery. It's reputation, and the way you build reputation is through people's emotions. Because at the end of the day, when you connect people emotionally, you can connect them with your church. And when you connect them with your church, you can connect them with Jesus Christ. You can connect them with their Heavenly Father. But you can't start there. You can't even start with your church. You have to start with their emotions. It's their emotions first. That gets them in the doors of your church. When they're in the doors of your church, that's the opportunity to connect them with God and to connect them with people who love God. So thank you for doing what you do, and thank you for caring about guests who are there for the first time, and guests who have been there for many years. Thanks, guys.